All right, these trade grades have been all over the place when it comes to the David Montgomery trade. The worst grade I saw for the Texans was a D given by Seth Walder. He tweeted it here. The Lions fleeced the Texans in the David Montgomery trade. We'll get into that. I want to talk a little bit first about the things that David Montgomery completely brings to the table and something that's a sight for our sore eyes, short yardage and red zone. This is where he is very, very notably a stud. And the Texans, as one of the worst red zone offenses, just absolutely atrocious on the goal line at times last year. They could really use a hammer to just take whatever blocking you have in front of them and find the end zone. And David Montgomery's done a terrific job of that in his career. Valid concerns with this, don't get me wrong. Just some of the things that Seth Walder brought up to give it a D grade. I have issues with some of those things. Most of the grades were B or C for the Texans on this. But it takes two to tango. Obviously, it's the running back, but it's also the offensive line. That's a given. Everybody I see that criticizes this trade says, well, doesn't matter what you do at running back if you don't have an. Yeah, we get it. They're gonna, if they don't address the offensive line, I'm gonna flip out. I'm gonna lose my crap. They have to do something about the offensive line. But we also know going into the season that Joe Mixon is almost 100% definitely not going to be here. And you know that Woody Marks can't handle a full workload of a top tier running back without getting injured a whole bunch. So the red zone element is huge in this. The other part is this. When it comes to the physicality of David Montgomery, I'm going to show you one of his nice runs where they're running duo. And this is the style of play that Nick Caley really wanted to run last year. We'll watch from the end zone view. Two double teams on the two defensive tackles, and then they work up to linebackers. And when we watch the running back here, there's a reading element to it, whereas those guys are double teaming. He's reading the linebackers to see how it all plays out. And then you got to make your read and hit the hole and bounce up and break a tackle and drag some people for yardage. He's really good at that. They show up all over his highlight reels. And that's what Caley early in the season thought they were going to be or thought that they could be as an offense. They couldn't do it, partly because of a combination of the health and running back situation, partly because the offensive line just wasn't that good at it. So we're going to keep coming back to this. Okay, yeah, they got to do something about the offensive line. And then the third part of it, aside from just short yardage and goal line, apart from his proclivity at running duo, which is something that I think that Nick Caley wants to do, hopefully with bigger, better offensive linemen. But the third is just simply, I'll just run his highlight reel, and the number of broken tackles, the number of extra yardage he grinds out, he's really, really good at that element of the game. And there's a lot to get excited about. He's 29 years old. He's got a lot of tread off his tire. If we get into Seth Walder's reasons for why he gave a D to the Texans, let's watch one more play here. Oh, look at that. It's a lot like Woody Marks runs. We've run offensive players that have the same swarm. For those of you who aren't Texans fans, that's D'Amico's acronym for special work ethic and relentless mindset. The defense is replete with swarmy players. You can't walk through the defensive huddle without bumping into a boatload of defensive swarm type players. Offense, they're few and far between. Woody Marks has a lot of swarm to him. Nico Collins, Tank Dell when he's healthy, swarmy type of guys. The place you'd love to have the most of those guys is on the offensive line. Absent. David Montgomery, one more swarm player to the offense. Let's look at Seth Walder and his really, really negative grade on the Texans. Let's see. Texans get running back David Montgomery. Lions get Juice Scruggs, 2026 fourth-round pick, and a 2027 seventh-round pick. That fourth-round pick is a late fourth-round pick. Somebody tried to jump in, and the Texans had to kind of juice up the deal there to get the deal done. But to read a couple excerpts from this, Montgomery's contract is reasonable. It'll cost Houston $6 million in cash this year and $9 million non-guaranteed next year, if left untouched. But that does not mean this was a smart acquisition. In aging, 29 years old in June, early down back whose prior team had been phasing him out is not worth spending real resources on. It surprises me that Detroit was able to lure a 4-7 swap here, since the Texans could have found comparable expected production for far less. I've got a few issues here. One is simply as far as David Montgomery being phased out, part of that was just the ascension of Jahmyr Gibbs and also the understanding that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be the guy there whenever they decided that they had to move on from David Montgomery. They got a lot of really good players in Detroit. They have to make some tough decisions. It makes sense. And it wasn't like David Montgomery was phased out, I think, specifically because his performance was lagging or anything. I think he's whenever I've watched him this year, he looks just as good as I thought he ever was. One big difference this year was he was running behind a less imposing offensive line. I keep seeing people in the national media talk about how awesome that Lions offensive line is. They were up until this year, and then they took a little bit of a step back. They were still a solid line, but they weren't nearly as good as they had been in the past. And his style of play is one that, the Texans have to get a better offensive line in front of them if they want to be a smash mouth football up the middle. Whenever somebody starts talking about, it surprises me that Detroit was able to lure yada, 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 when the Texans could have found comparable expected production for far less. When did it become this simple? When did all of a sudden a guy like David Montgomery, who I have admired for years, when did it become so simple to, hey, why don't you just draft a guy in the 5th round? He'll be just like David Montgomery. I feel like you're trying to sell me a bag of oregano and tell me that it's just as good as really good weed, as I've read about in articles. It's David Montgomery. David Montgomery is a really, really good back. He's old. That's definitely a consideration when it comes to this assertion that he obviously wrote before the news of another team trying to jump in on the process. Was interesting that, basically the Texans are paying a price that nobody else is willing to pay. There were other people that were competitive in this. David Montgomery also had said that the Texans were his preferred destination. So the milieu of everything here is that I'm cool with the price. It feels kind of pricey. It shakes out to, when you take a late 4th round pick and a next year's 7th, call it a 4th round pick. You're not going to go and find comparable production every single time you draft a running back in the 4th round like that. You're just not. This also does allow Woody Marks to hopefully focus more on receiving and that element of his game. Once Woody Marks became the feature back, it was a lot tougher for them to really get him involved in the passing game, while Woody Marks is also learning how to block in the NFL, which he did a great job of by rookie standards, learning just how to be a running back in the NFL. All of those things kept them from really utilizing Woody Marks to the best of his abilities. I like the combo of these two. The other part about this too, that I forgive people for outside of Houston not really thinking about this immediately, but they got to make a decision on Joe Mixon. And they can save $8 million by cutting Joe Mixon. It's hard to do that when you don't necessarily know what your answer is after you cut him. And as they head into free agency, we've seen the running back market be very volatile from year to year. A couple of years ago, remember Joe Shane was on Hard Knocks offseason talking about how easy it would be to get even a guy like Devin Singletary for not that much money. He ended up spending like twice as much as whatever number he cited in that video leading into the free agency, because the running market was just, it took off out of nowhere. This does give you some clarity there, and it's for a player that I think that Texans fans are going to like a lot. I know people up in Detroit certainly like him a lot. I'll jump back in on the highlight reel there for a bit as I see some comments. All right. Help Seth out. Use the plus, the thumbs up. All right, yeah. I like that talk. Brandon's talking about something. Need that vet experience to help clean up plays and more on the offense. I think the veteran experience part, and depending on if the Texans wanted to spend money and go all out on a guy like ETN or somebody like that, A, you don't know what the price is going to be. B, they've got to spend money on the offensive line. The interesting thing about this is that Seth Walder ended up giving the Texans an A for the he gave him an A for the Titus Howard trade, which surprised me. When we get to the offensive line part of it, Scruggs has 1 year left on his deal, but the draft picks could be more than enough for the Lions. They can use that capital to find another running back to complement Gibbs late in the draft, or find a low-cost veteran in free agency. What? Okay, Seth Walder, he's pissing me off. Where? Are you kidding me? They can use that draft capital to find another running back to complement Gibbs. Sure. I don't know. This is the problem with the draft, is people start looking at this stuff as if every 4th or 5th round pick that you select is going to be a viable NFL player. That's not the way it works. 25% of 4th rounders end up being long-term starters in the NFL. Yes, you can find guys perhaps, but it's David Montgomery. Yes, he's older, but to act like you can replace that production just simply by a wave of your magic wand in the draft, it angers me more than I want to be angered on a Tuesday. Damn it. And now my voice is going. D by Seth Walder. A bunch of other people gave Seth Walder gave the Titus Howard trade an A, but the average I'm seeing for the Montgomery trade is about a B or C. All of this really hinges on, all right, do the Texans get it in gear and get a good offensive line in front of all of these guys, including one C.J. Stroud?